Live your life within the moment. And don't go wait until the morning. You never know when it is over. All that I know is we'll get older. So let us dance this night away.
Hi everyone, and before we begin, please listen to the following important public service announcement from the Honorable Judy Heumann. Judy is the former United States Assistant Secretary of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services in the Clinton administration and the former U.S. State Department Special Advisor for International Disability Rights in the Obama administration. Recently, Judy starred in the Netflix documentary Crip Camp.
Hello, my name is Judy Heumann. I'm here today to encourage you to please take your COVID vaccine. And if you have friends and family that haven't, please encourage them also. COVID is to be taken seriously. In addition to taking the vaccine, please use other protective methods. Wear a mask, use gloves, and sanitize frequently. If you need additional information and you live in Eastern Oregon, you can contact EOCIL. Thank you, and protect yourselves and the community.
Welcome everyone back to Voices in Action, a podcast by Eastern Oregon Center for Independent Living, a global disability resource and advocacy center. And I'm your host, Almader Perez. Over the course of seasons 2 and 3, we're going to be covering a variety of topics that relate to EOCIL's core priorities. And these include, but aren't limited to, HIV and harm reduction services, food and water security, LGBTQI plus advocacy and services, and countless others. And if you're interested in what services we provide, I encourage everyone to check us out online at eocil.org for a full breakdown of what we offer. And during these seasons, we're going to be speaking with individuals with lived experiences, leaders of global and local advocacy organizations, and people responsible for developing and implementing policies that affect our daily lives. And we will learn from each other along the way. And just before we start, I'd like to share some information about our risk and discomfort. So during this episode, we're going to be talking about complex and prolonged trauma that can profoundly affect physical, mental, and behavioral health outcomes across the lifespan. Talking about stress, emotions, and experiences of adverse and traumatic events may be distressing to you. Some items we will be discussing are very personal. They may upset you, and you may find triggering. Listeners' discretion is advised, and if any of these topics or subjects do affect you, please know that you can reach out to EOCIL, where you can talk to a professional counselor in a safe and welcoming environment. Thank you. Today, I will be speaking with David Kracke regarding his experience and covering SB420. David, if you'd like to give a quick introduction of who you are.
Thank you, Amador. My name is David Kracke. I am an attorney in Oregon. I have been an attorney in Oregon since 1990. I have been active in the brain injury community at a policy level since about 2002. Was part of the team that created and wrote what is now known as Max's Law, the nation's first enacted youth concussion return to play law, and have worked continually since that time on policy matters that are important to people in Oregon with brain injury. I live in Portland. I'm married. My wife and I are celebrating our 30th anniversary this year. We have 2 daughters who are off and on their own in their mid and late 20s. I'm active outdoorsman. I do a lot of hiking and still love my backpacking and kayaking and exploring all that Oregon has to offer out in nature. I also am active in environmental issues with an organization called Wild Aid. Currently, however, my position is Oregon's Brain Injury Advocate Coordinator, and that is a role that I was asked to fill when the position was initially created back in 2018. I work out of the Center on Brain Injury Research and Training at the University of Oregon with some absolutely incredible people there it's called CBIRT, that's our acronym, and it's cbirt.org. Absolutely wonderful people there, wonderful scientists, psychologists, educators, and the like. In this role as Oregon's Brain Injury Advocate Coordinator, I've been very honored to pursue and to advance our effort to bring brain injury resource navigation to Oregon, and that is the focus of Oregon Senate Bill 420 in this current legislative session, which is the 2023 legislative session.
Okay, awesome. And just like a quick little background for the people, like how did you get into this field of work? What kind of drove you into studying and wanting to be part of brain injuries and formulating these bills, writing out these long policies and procedures?
A little bit of personal experience with brain injury. I suffered a pretty severe concussion when I was really young in second grade. Fell off my bike, went over the handlebars, landed on my chin, fractured my jaw, was knocked out, which is a hallmark of at least a mild traumatic brain injury. So I understood the way, it was a very traumatizing event for me. I had my mouth wired shut for about 8 weeks. Was laid up in bed for a long time. Again, I was very young, but at the same time, it really instilled in me how sudden the onset of a brain injury can be. Literally 1 second, everything is fine. The next second, you're on the cement, having landed on your chin, and bones are fractured and brains are injured. Going forward a number of years, my brother had a similar experience riding a skateboard. This was back in the 1970s when helmets were not a thing. We didn't wear helmets back then, unfortunately. He fractured his skull from ear to ear, back of his skull, and suffered a pretty significant brain injury. However, he thankfully recovered fully from that as well. Fast forward to 1990 when I passed the bar in Oregon. I started representing people who had been injured and who had suffered brain injuries in a litigation context, helping them essentially fight the insurance companies. It's a very one-sided fight for people who don't have skilled attorneys when they are going up against an insurance company, which is highly staffed with extremely competent people. I want to make that clear. These attorneys that work for these insurance companies are very skilled, very smart, generally good people, but in my mind, they are using their skills in an effort to deny people justice and the justice that they are entitled to based on someone else's negligence. And so I really took that under my wing and represented my clients, many of whom had suffered brain injuries. Mm-hmm. And this was back in the 90s when I hate to say it, but brain injuries just weren't understood nearly to the extent that they are today. And so one of my cases in the early 2000s had a brain injury component to it, but it also is the mechanism by which I got into legislative and policy work. She was a young woman. She was at the Safeway over in Clackamas, in Clackamas County, Oregon. And she got in her car. She put her groceries in the back seat of her car on the passenger side. She got into her car, started up her car. The door ajar light was on. It was that back door that she had just tried to close but didn't. She got out of her car while the car was still running. She went around the car, went to shut the door. And as she was shutting the door, the carjacker jumped in her car and sped off. The back door slammed shut. It caught her dress, and she was dragged about 100 or so feet across the Safeway parking lot.
Oh, wow.
Until she hit the speed bump, and her dress ripped, and she was thankfully propelled away from the vehicle as the vehicle sped off. Nonetheless, she suffered significant injuries, including a brain injury, and I went to recover damages for her as I would in any other case. And I was told at the time that because she was injured by her own car, her ability to recover what are called non-economic damages were non-existent. And I couldn't believe it. I said, well, wait a second, it was her own car, but it was during the commission of a carjacking. It was certainly not, it's not like she drove herself into a tree. And so that started my quest to change that law. And
wow.
Yeah, go ahead.
That's absolutely just like mind baffling that they would say something like that, especially in the midst of getting their vehicle taken from them and not having any control. Wow. No, because I
Yeah.
like to ask that question because, the saying, it takes one to know. And a majority of staff here in EOCIL are people with disabilities. And the
Mhm.
main reason for it is we ourselves are able to understand people with similar disabilities. So I joined on here because I'm Spanish speaking, so I'm able to connect with the Hispanic population. I'm able to understand them on a cultural level, understand what their beliefs are, understand how they think, what the norms are and what isn't. And that's what the majority of here, like even Kurt Toombs, the CEO or CFO, he's a person with a disability. He's hard of hearing. So anyone that comes in with that situation, he's able to relate to them on a personal level. So like understanding that you went through that similar experience yourself personally, and then you had family members, and then just that story of that woman that got dragged, really helps the cause, because it's nice to see that people who've lived through their experience are making an effort to make changes about it. And I know you mentioned there briefly that back in the day, there was, did you say the 70s, brain injuries and head trauma and stuff like that wasn't really understood. Can you kind of like go into detail on like the different types of brain injuries there are, like if there's long-term, short-term effects, just like everything around brain injury, because that's the main principle of what this bill is addressing brain injuries and the services to access it.
Absolutely. And first of all, thank you for that background, and hats off to EOSIL and to Kurt Toombs in particular. Kurt has been an active member of these current efforts over the past 4 years or so. We've actually established an Eastern Oregon brain injury network with providers, service and support providers out there. And EOSIL and Kurt in particular have just been absolutely wonderful and incredibly supportive of our effort to do that. Uh, brain injury brain injury is categorized in at three levels. You have mild, moderate, and severe. And for the entirety of my career, I have railed against the categorization of a brain injury as being mild, because there is no such thing in my mind as a mild brain injury. Yet that's how the medical community distinguishes that lower level of brain injury from the more guaranteed, more severe brain injuries that fall into the moderate and severe categories. But a mild traumatic brain injury is typically associated with a concussion. And that's, we can't watch sporting events these days without having someone somewhere talk about concussions, and rightfully so. Thank God they are. And that's, there's another chapters after that carjacking story I just mentioned that lead into what is now known as Max's Law, which is as I mentioned, the nation's first enacted youth concussion return to play law. But a mild traumatic brain injury is a injury that 86% of the time, plus or minus, is going to heal, provided that it's the person's first mild traumatic brain injury, first concussion. It's going to be characterized by a recovery period that is going to have various signs, symptoms, and behaviors consistent with a mild traumatic brain or a mild brain injury. Things such as confusion, loss of balance, trouble, short-term memory problems, other executive function problems, maybe a headache, tinnitus or ringing in the ears, sensitivity to light. It's kind of this whole constellation of symptoms. And unfortunately, there's an adage in my community that says, if you've seen one brain injury, you've seen one brain injury. In other words, no two people experience brain injury in the same way. And it's more like a menu. It's pick and choose. What do you have? So those injuries are transient, hopefully. At the same time, though, there is a recovery period, much like if someone breaks their arm or breaks their leg or some other physical injury, there's going to be a recovery period. The difference is that a person with a broken arm is going to have a cast on, a broken leg similarly. With a brain injury, it's also called the invisible injury. And so people aren't going to necessarily recognize that you are in fact recovering from that injury.
Yeah.
So When you get into the moderate and the severe categories, that's when it's really apparent. And those folks, especially in the severe category, it's very obvious that they have a brain injury in terms of their speech, their gait, their ability to move, their memory issues, things along those lines. And oftentimes at the more severe level, they're bedridden and really struggling.
Okay. And then that, in contrary to like a head injury would just refer to what the skeletal portion outside, not involving the brain at all, or is it kind of like intertwined? People mix and match those terms.
Yeah, those terms are interchangeable in a lot of different people. I like to make sure that I call it a brain injury. That's what we're talking about. The brain is the control center of the human body. It's where everything is regulated. It's where our thoughts exist. This whole subjectivity that is the individuality that is all of us. It is the area where we figure things out, our problem solving, our communication centers, our experience centers, everything that really goes into being a human that allows us, as we are doing right here, to communicate back and forth, to experience each other and kind of interact, is happening fundamentally within the brain, or at least in systems that are controlled by the brain. So I focus on the definition, or the wording brain injury.
Okay.
When you talk about head injury, and again, those are interchangeable in many areas. But I don't like that, because a head injury can also be lacerations, contusions, a broken nose, for instance, problems with the external portion of the ear, things like that, that can have, and it's certainly an injury, but not an injury to the brain or to the control center. So when I talk about brain injury, I use the word brain injury. It's important to distinguish, I have not mentioned traumatic brain injury. Many of the injuries that I've just described are traumatic in nature, but the purpose of Senate Bill 420 is to provide navigation services for people with any type of brain injury. We did not want to discriminate and say, oh, nope, you don't have a traumatic brain injury, therefore we're not going to talk to you. If anybody has a problem with their brain function, they will be able to access resources or navigation services through this program that we hope will be established if and when Senate Bill 420 is passed.
Okay, perfect. Because that'll lead me into my next area, because I just want to give a quick overview of what brain injury is and kind of the differences between it. So speaking about SB420, do you want to go over? I have it right here in front of me. Just kind of like the little synopsis of what it is. But do you want to kind of, in a nutshell, explain what the purpose of it, the idea behind it, and the reason that we want this to go through?
Absolutely. Senate Bill 420 is going to establish brain injury resource navigation in the state of Oregon. Oregon is currently one of 11 states without a robust brain injury resource navigation program. And for a state that has been a leader and continues to be a leader in so many areas, such as return to play, return to school, and others, for us not to have a dedicated resource navigation office is really, quite frankly, embarrassing. And when I talk to my colleagues around the country, I'm part of a national coalition of brain injury administrators and policy experts. They are really kind of dumbfounded that Oregon does not have this. Now, that is not to say that we don't have good information and referral INR services. We do. That's also, please understand, that does not in any way detract from the incredibly great work that the Centers for Independent Living, the CILs, including Eastern Oregon CIL, are doing. There are groups like Lila in Eugene, ILR in Portland, EOCIL out in Eastern Oregon, and obviously the others are doing wonderful work. Similarly, we have some great support groups throughout the state, especially up here in Portland. We have Brain Injury Connections Northwest. We have the Brain Injury Alliance of Oregon, which puts on a wonderful annual conference in the Portland area that emphasizes a lot of the main experts in the field, not only from Oregon, but from around the country. That being said, though, we do not have a robust navigation office. So knowing that, and knowing what other states have done and have been doing for decades, myself and the team that I'm working with have proposed this, the establishment of a brain injury resource navigation office at the Department of Human Services in the APD, which stands for Aging and People with Disability subsection of DHS. And it will essentially be a central hub where a person with a brain injury or their loved ones or any interested person can contact the navigator, and it will probably be a phone-based interaction or a Zoom-based interaction like we are doing here. Let's hope as we get further from the COVID restrictions that there will be more one-on-one in person, because that is so important for people with brain injury. But it will be a place where those people who have experienced a brain injury or know someone who has and they're concerned about that person, where they can contact a central location that will be able to connect them with various support and services throughout the state. A couple of fundamental principles go into the development of this program. Number one, it has to be equitable. We have people in this community who are underserved for a variety of reasons. You mentioned your Hispanic background, kind of the very tragic circumstance that I think about is the recent immigrant, maybe living in Woodburn, Oregon, in an immigrant community, not a lot of contact, as you know, outside of that community. God forbid, her son is injured in a car collision, suffers a brain injury. Well, that person has very specific needs, and they are also going to be focused. There's going to be an inherent language barrier if English is a difficult language for that person to communicate through. So we need to make sure that these navigators have the ability to communicate in a way that's meaningful. They will also be geographically relevant. There you are out in Ontario, Oregon.
Yeah.
And the access to services in Ontario is far different than the services that are available in the Portland area. So if someone from Ontario were to call this office and all they got was, all you have to do is go down to Southwest Morrison and 14th, and there's a support group in Portland that you can, get involved with. Well, that does that person no good.
Absolutely no good. Yeah.
So they have to be geographically relevant as well. And finally, they need to be expansive. And, when you think of services that a person with a brain injury needs, most people logically and appropriately tend to think in terms of medical and therapeutic services. And that is true. Obviously, they will need the best medical and therapy available. But then as you really dig deep into what it means to have a brain that is injured, you're going to probably need help with employment services, with vocational rehabilitation services. God forbid you're living on the edge and the brain injury because you can't work throws you into a situation where you're homeless. Now you need housing services. If you're disabled, permanently as a result, you're going to need to understand what disability services are out there. If you're a veteran, and many of our veterans, unfortunately, have suffered brain injuries. Traumatic brain injury was the quote unquote signature injury of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, veteran services are really important. Social support, as I mentioned, the support groups, peer-to-peer support is critically important because, as you know, if you're talking to someone who doesn't understand what you're dealing with, you guys are kind of talking around or right through each other. When you have that peer-to-peer support, when you're talking to someone who understands your subjective experience, you really get a lot more out of it. Other issues, food stability, caregiver respite. When a brain injury occurs, a person is immediately disabled. Well, what does that mean? That means that someone in that person's life, family member, loved one, good friend, whatever it might be, that person is reliant on a caregiver, at least temporarily, for that support. And caregiving is a really hard job, especially if it's not something that you are used to or expecting to do. And so that person, that caregiver, we need to give them a break. And so there are some things that we're working on with the Medicaid, with a Medicaid waiver. Currently, I'm on a work group task force that's working on that to try to provide caregiver respite. And this is kind of some of the issues that these navigation services will provide. And it's not just going to be medical and therapeutic, although that's incredibly important, but it's going to understand that we are dealing with a whole person. If this care is, or this navigation service is going to be person-centered, we're going to take them as they are, nothing about us without us.
Yeah.
What makes sense for that person? And that's the goal of the program.
Yeah, and then that's a powerful message. It's extremely powerful message, because nothing without is like, I never heard that phrase before until I started working here at EOCIL, and it took me a while to fully understand what that meant, and especially the impact that has on people who suffer these traumatic events or go through these life problems, being able to understand that there's others out there willing to help them and provide these services. So what do these services then look like? So beforehand, where did people have to go to find the service that they needed particularly? What's the reason that we need to have a localized central point that people can go to and then get referred out to get the service provided? So where were people going to before, this bill kind of came into play, and kind of break that down?
Absolutely. Well, as I mentioned in our last kind of discussion point, the types and the number of resources that we need to connect people with brain injury to are extremely varied. They are, as I mentioned, medical, therapeutic, employment, housing, disability, veteran services, social support, food respite or food stability, respite care. These are all separate issues. And it's hard enough as an able-bodied person to navigate through the various silos, the mazes, in order to get to those needs that will make your life better. So when you ask someone who is suffering from a brain injury to navigate through these silos, silos that are hard for me to navigate through, it is nearly impossible to expect that they are going to get, or their ability to navigate is nearly impossible. And it is unreasonable for us to expect that they are going to get through these convoluted, siloed systems on their own. And so what happens, and what my experience is with so many people with brain injury, is they give up. And there is one of the hallmarks of brain injury is kind of this self-isolation. And it's largely because getting out into the quote unquote real world is really difficult for people with brain injury. Even things like navigating a bus system or navigating roads are hard. I've talked to constituents and clients over the years who say, I couldn't find my way to work in my car. I would get lost on my way to work. Those people with brain injury who are on public transportation, I couldn't figure out the buses that I was otherwise, before my injury, doing routinely without even a care. They get into a grocery store. And next time you're in a grocery store, I want you to pay close attention to what that environment really looks like. Typically, you have bright, really kind of obnoxious fluorescent lights up above everywhere. Fluorescent lights, I've known from experience with my clients and constituents, fluorescent lights are really bad, really hard on people with vision problems resulting from a brain injury. Then you start walking down an aisle and look at the shapes, look at the colors, look at the font, look at the words, and imagine if your vision is off, or imagine if your cognition is such that it all blends together. Figuring this stuff out after a brain injury, what were otherwise very routine, very normal day-to-day experiences, figuring out how to do those things with a brain injury is sometimes impossible, and regardless, very difficult. And so asking people suffering from cognitive impairment, who should be focused on their recovery, on getting better, asking them also now to take on this added stress load and reality, pressure of having to live a life without accommodations for their brain injury, really is asking them to do the impossible. And so what happens is those people start falling through the proverbial cracks. And one of, as I just started this portion with, one of the hallmarks of that is self-isolation. And at the start of COVID, I wrote a column and I said, basically, here we all were able-bodied people dealing with this isolation from COVID. We were all in quarantine and we basically weren't going out, or if we were, it wasn't much. And it was a much different world. Well, that mirrors the isolation that people with brain injury have all the time. And so I think that if we think about the hardship and the kind of the struggle that we all had at especially those first few months of COVID, when things, before the vaccine, when things were really, really weird and isolating, that mirrors the life that people with brain injury have all the time. And those are the folks that just really need help. So to have access or to have information about all of those supports and services in one central location is going to be a game changer for those people. Again, it's going to be, it's going to be person-centered. In other words, one person is going to need information about medical and therapeutic, another about housing, another about food stability. Certainly insurance issues come into play. And it's going to be different for each person, but it's going to allow everyone to have access to those services that they need. And then there's one other thing that's really important, and this is a model that's being utilized around the country in the really robust and really successful brain injury resource navigation offices around the country. And that is that it's going to be human-based contact with the proverbial, air quotes, warm handoff from the survivor of brain injury to that person in whatever that service or support network that can help them. In other words, it's not going to be call this number and good luck. Go on this website, have fun. We hope you make it. It's going to be, all right, let's do this together. The navigator is going to say, let's do this together. I'm going to get the people from supportive services for veterans families on the line. I'm going to make sure that we set something up here. We're going to get it figured out. If I need to help you actually facilitate whatever that future meeting is, we're going to do that. But it's not just going to be that single one-off communication. That navigator is then going to be contacting that person, the person with a brain injury, on an interval basis, meaning a week later, 3 weeks later, and 6 weeks later, and 4 months later, to make sure that that connection has not only been made, but that that connection has stuck, meaning that that person with brain injury is now engaged and receiving the support and service that that person needs. So that's kind of the hallmark of what this navigation program is going to look like.
Yeah, and that's really great to hear, especially because that check-in, sort of say not a lot of places do provide that. It's kind of tough luck. We don't offer that here, or I've already connected you to this person. It's not my responsibility now. I'm off the clock. Good luck to your future endeavor. Instead of like checking in, especially when people have like traumatic events that happen in their lives. I know particularly in the department that I work in as a harm reduction specialist, I'm talking to people out in the community who inject drugs. So for me to kind of like not check in on them can be really, really damaging to them, just because they end up going back into the old habits, old ways of thinking. If I'm not there to check in on them, like, hey, how you doing? Do you still have the Narcan that I provided you? Do you still have these needles that I've been giving you? And if I don't do that, then they're going to be using dirty needles. They're going to be sharing them with one another. They're going to be potentially passing disease and infections among one another. And it's my job to like not exactly like parent them, but check in on their well-being, make sure that they're still following through with their other counselors, making sure that they're following through with their rehabilitation, making sure that I'm doing my job to the best of its ability to ensure that they have the best quality of life, so that they can make the steps to get fully recovered, to make the steps to live on their own and make their decisions by themselves. So, and that's a really great thing to know, that that's what this bill is essentially going to do. It's going to be a person-to-person interaction. and which is just great. And then kind of going into that, are you saying it's going to serve everybody, or is there kind of like 'cause I know there's some like departments, some services that are specifically target the minority groups, the under marginalized communities. Is this going to be for everyone, or is there going to be kind of certain sectors where, this demographic of people have higher rates of brain injuries compared to this one? So we're going to not essentially prioritize, but we're going to make extra effort to make sure that these people are getting the treatment and the help that's needed because there's such a lack of service for them.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. But before we get into it, I want to ask you a question. And
Yeah.
that is that when you're going back to what you just said, which good for you, when you're that person who checks in on the people with substance use disorder, and when they hear from you on a regular basis, and you obviously are concerned about their well-being, isn't it true that you create almost kind of a friend role? You become a support for those people, and their recovery is enhanced as a result of your real concerted and person-centered communication. Isn't that the case?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And especially I've countless people here that I don't treat them as a client, as just another number in the system. I treat them as a human being. I treat them as a friend. I get to know who they are individually, and then I'll go from there offering my services and if it can benefit them. And then from there, I'm able to communicate them on a personal level. They're able to share with me information that they wouldn't feel comfortable sharing in a doctor's office or a professional setting, just because I'm out in the street where they are, meeting them in the spots that they need me to meet them at. So yeah, absolutely. Making that one-on-one connection, being a supportive person in their life when no one else understands what they're going through, no one else can relate to the situation that they've been placed in, is absolutely impactful in so many ways.
Yeah, that's what I knew, and I'm really glad to hear you say that. And essentially, that is what we are going to be doing with this Office of Brain Injury Resource Navigation. So the question that you asked, are we there to serve everyone? Yes, we are there to serve everyone with a brain injury. You
Okay.
notice that I'm not using the words traumatic brain injury. And this was a real important point that we made with this bill, is that we define brain injury not as a traumatic brain injury, but as an injury to the brain from whatever source. And that is the case because we have people with traumatic brain injuries that you get obviously in some sort of traumatic event. You have brain injuries from what's called anoxia or lack of oxygen, and that can be anything from drowning to strangulation. And unfortunately, we see strangulation in a lot of cases of domestic abuse or domestic violence and intimate partner violence. Um, Similarly, we have stroke, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, kind of these disease-based brain injuries. Now, the good news with those three that I just mentioned, stroke, dementia, and Alzheimer's, is that there are really good state and national organizations that are focused on those particular injuries or ailments. And as a result, the navigator in those cases will be able to create the warm handoff to the state and national organizations that are really equipped to help answer all of their questions. But we didn't want to have a system that was that was limiting, that was prejudiced against
Yeah.
certain people with brain injury. That would have been horrific. We have some wonderful, wonderful people in Portland. In particular, a woman who I've worked with now for decades named Fern Wilgus. And Fern, she won't mind if I say this, she suffered a stroke and needs and needed support and service. And those are different, though her needs and supports are different than someone who is a younger person and still in school and suffered a brain injury during a sporting event or during a car collision, whatever it might be. So yeah, we are going to provide support and services for everyone, regardless of who they are, where they live, regardless of the mechanism of their injury. As long as we have the information that's going to help them, that information is going to be imparted to them. Now, you mentioned the groups who are more prone to brain injury. The leading group that is prone to brain injury are elderly people over the age of 70 or 75. And the leading mechanism of those brain injuries is falls. And so it's falls downstairs, in the bathroom, just walking, whatever it might be. And so there are some really significant efforts happening at the Oregon Health Authority, for instance. We are working with some wonderful people at the Oregon Health Authority, Nirmal Adar and others, who are really focused on fall prevention. And that's a whole nother area we can talk about, prevention. And that's kind of one of my driving focuses. How can we prevent brain injury?
Yeah.
And so with people who are elderly, we offer, or there are people who offer exercise classes, for instance, Tai Chi, Pilates, aerobics, others that improve balance, coordination, muscle tone, the fall prevention in the way of grab bars, making sure that stairs are properly equipped, making sure that there's proper lighting, making sure that people are using assisted devices when necessary. So we know that that is a huge driver of brain injury among the elderly population in Oregon and around the world, actually. Similarly, we know that a lot of young men, especially, are suffer brain injuries in the course of what they do as young men. And I'm not singling out men versus young women, because of course, many young women are equally active in some very risky sports. I was a rock climber when I was young. I still am a skier. Came close a couple of different times, and unfortunately, not all people are lucky to avoid the brain injury.
Yeah.
That young kid is going to need help in school, for instance. In 2020, the folks at the Center on Brain Injury Research and Training, CBERT, the organization I work for and with, we drafted a bill that provides academic, behavioral, and social accommodations for concussed students returning to school. And it has been a wonderful success where it's been applied. That being said, we still have a lot of work to do to get it out there in every school throughout the state. But basically, it allows the teacher to identify what will work best for the student based on the student's A, needs, and B, personality. And second, what will work best in the classroom based on the physical environment in the classroom, the social environment in the classroom. And all of these things combine to allow the teacher to provide the best academic, social, and behavioral accommodations. So really, it's a huge population. In fact, we haven't talked about this, so I should bring it up now. According to Center on Disease Control, CDC, estimates, and using their most current demographic statistics and information, we estimate that there are upwards of 84,000 Oregonians living with the long-term chronic effect of brain injury today.
Wow.
That is a huge number. And this is using, working at the Center on Brain Injury Research and Training. One of the best things about this position for me, coming from the litigation area, which is where I was for 28 years, one of the most wonderful things for me working with this incredible community is the level of evidence-based, peer-reviewed studies that drive the work over there. This is not done on a whim. This is not done because we think it's going to work. This is done because it's evidence-based and it's peer-reviewed. So when these new revised numbers come out that really significantly increased what our estimate was for the number of Oregonians, up from 45,000 to 84,000, a huge increase. But again, it's based on current numbers and our evolving awareness and understanding of how widespread brain injury is.
Yeah, and then so considering how common it is, how easy it is to tell if someone has a brain injury? Like, 'cause I know a majority of coming from a Hispanic family, if I hit my head, first thing I was told is walk it off, you'll be fine. you wait till tomorrow. Obviously, if it was like severe where I didn't want to stand up, I was bawling, obviously my parents would take me. But there's just instances where it doesn't feel as bad as what the actual damage is. So how can you kind of like tell whether or not you need to go in to get checked out for a brain injury, for a head injury, or however you want to put it? Because I know I've taken many falls. I love climbing, been climbing trees since I could grab and hold myself. So, and I've fallen plenty of times, smashed my head on the ground, crashed on my bike, and always just like, oh, I got a welt on the side of my head. Never ones that I think, oh, something could be wrong. My parents were like, oh, well, that's what you get for being a little kid. Just shake it off. We'll ice it down. Nothing's wrong. Um, how hard is it to tell if someone's had a traumatic brain injury or just a brain injury itself, or how easy or how can you kind of spot it out?
Yeah, that's actually a really important question, and it goes to the heart of our youth concussion laws, especially the way that the youth return to play laws are written in Oregon is that if a coach either sees or is told that a player is experiencing signs, symptoms, or behaviors consistent with a brain injury, then that coach must remove that player from play and shall not allow that player to return to play until the expiration of at least 24 hours and only with a return to play release from a qualified healthcare professional. And so that, your question fundamentally exposes the quote unquote invisibility of a brain injury,
Mhm.
because when it is a mild traumatic brain injury, it's not necessarily going to be something that an outside person can look at you and say, oh, I can tell what's going on, because they can't any more than I
Yeah.
can tell what you're thinking about now, or you can tell what I'm thinking about now. It's just not within our capabilities as humans to recognize and to understand that. And so in your case, when you fall out of a tree, and if you're complaining about things such as a headache, balance, vision problems, confusion, memory, my brother in that story I mentioned, my brother didn't he had amnesia. He couldn't remember. He somehow found his way home, came inside, laid down on the bed. He was pale as a ghost. My mom came in and said, Theo, what's going on? He looked up at my mom and said, who are you? So there are signs that any parent should be on the lookout for, that if for instance, Amador, you would come in and said, your mom had come over and said, Amador, how are you feeling? And you looked at her and said, who are you? That's a telltale sign to get
Yeah.
to the hospital,
Yeah, absolutely.
figure it out, because the risk is that you are experiencing what's called a subdural hematoma, a brain bleed. And that is an absolutely critical situation, and it can lead to the need for what's called a craniotomy and or other medical treatment, emergency medical treatment, without which a person with a brain bleed can die really pretty suddenly. So there are some pretty telltale signs, and being an attorney and living as I do, and as long as someone, as long as it's, they have the insurance, and that is a huge driver as well. A lot of people don't want to go in to see a doctor because it's going to cost them so much
Yeah.
money. Again, costing, I don't care how much it costs. If it's going to save my kids, I'm going to pay it, and I'm going to figure out how to deal with that. So using what's called the precautionary principle, meaning I'm going to be better safe than sorry. I'm going to err on the side of taking my kid in to have them checked out, or I'm going to go in myself and be checked out, because a brain injury is so serious, can be so serious, and there can be this brain bleed happening that they will only be able to identify primarily using a diagnostic tool, a CAT scan or other imaging. The only, I need to make sure that that's not happening.
Yeah.
And so, I urge people, if they have any concern, to go in and see their doctor. Now, in 2019, the state epidemiologist came out with a study that was really accurate and really great, that indicated that 13,500 Oregonians were seen at either the emergency room or inpatient hospital stay for a brain injury in, I think it was the year 2018 or 2019. It's 13,500. that were in that category of people that they felt like they had to get into the hospital. However, all the people that were seen by their primary care doctors, that were seen at Zoom cares, that were seen at urgent care centers, or in your case, who never went in and never saw anybody, that is a much larger group of people. So we know that the prevalence of brain injury is really significant within the state. We know that it's a serious condition when it happens. And, if I can urge anything, it's to apply the precautionary principle. If either you as an adult or certainly a child of a child suffers a brain injury, to have them checked out. The other thing is that there are things that kind of, go unrecognized with brain injury, and you don't really understand what's going on because you're in this state of cognitive impairment. You're having trouble thinking. You're not thinking straight. And, there are a lot of therapies that can help someone kind of come out of that and reestablish as much of that neural connection as possible to get their brain as close to or all the way to healed.
Yeah. And I know, kind of coming back to this whole bill with, this would be something that if I experience a fall, I would be able to walk into one of these locations, speak with someone there, and have them navigate, what it is that I'm needing. If I'm needing to go see a doctor, if there is something more severe, they can send me to like urgent care or the ER, or that's what this bill is essentially doing, is being able to provide a location for people to go that centralizes everything that they can then outsource. Right. And how many places do they plan to establish and where at?
Yeah, it'll be, first of all, first part of your question, yes, that's exactly right. We do anticipate, however, that people will be contacting the resource navigators after the acute phase of the injury. I hope that, we won't get phone calls from people. Hey, I have a massive headache after a car collision, and I don't know where to go or what to do. I'm hoping that those people will understand. We'll get to the hospital as soon as you can. Go in and there may be something really terrible going on. That being the case, if we get those calls, by all means, there will be kind of an acute response in terms of seek medical care. Absolutely, that will be one of the threshold questions once this program is established. But then after the fact, it's exactly right. It's going to help again on a person-centered. What are your needs? We're going to connect you with those supports and services that are relevant to the problems that you have there and then. And again, a person who is 75 and has just fallen in a bathroom is going to have much different needs than a 15-year-old boy who just got in a bike accident.
Yeah, absolutely. And then kind of coming back, so how many locations are like I don't know if it'd be like partnering up with other community partners, other businesses, or is it going to be like entirely separate buildings where we have trained staff that help navigate? How many of those locations are going to be provided throughout the state of Oregon?
Yeah, the central office is going to be headquartered at the Department of Human Services. And if it was pre-COVID, I would tell you that it's going to be all in one office down in Salem. But post-COVID, I was just speaking with the director of DHS on Monday, just 3 days ago. And he explained that in that DHS building where DHS and the Oregon Health Authority were all located, pre-COVID, they would have 1,000 people in that office. Post-COVID, they have about 100 people in that office. And so what it's emphasizing is what you and I are doing is we're working remotely.
Yeah.
We are absolutely getting something done today, but I'm in Portland and you're in Ontario.
Yeah.
Luckily, we have the kind of the acceptance of using this video conferencing, which in some ways, granted from a two-dimensional standpoint, we are nonetheless kind of together in a way. Yeah. So we're not going to be limited by physical location in terms of where the navigators are going to be physically located. Yeah. But what is going to be what we are going to be sure of is that those navigators have access to those resources that are geographically relevant, culturally relevant, and what have you, as we've talked about earlier. So when you're with that navigator, again, these are not case managers. We are not going to be doing the work that you're doing with your clients who are on the street, and you're actually getting out there face to face with them. It's not going to be a case management model. It's going to be a case navigation model. Now, granted, there's a lot of similarities between case navigation and case management, but primarily the difference will be that our job, the navigator's job, will be to connect that person with a warm handoff to those people that will be able to help them. And so that may include case managers. If, for instance, there is a disability to such an extent that the case manager is appropriate, or if it's a veteran who needs help with supportive services for veterans and their families, and for instance in housing, and they need to remove barriers to housing, past convictions, outstanding fines, what have you. There's a very robust program in Portland through the Public Defender's Office that is removing barriers to entry, and homeless veterans are being housed every day through those services. And that's the type of kind of broad spectrum service and support that we're talking about. But one other thing I do want to talk about that COVID whole video conference has allowed, and that is it has allowed people to engage with support groups. And peer-to-peer support, much like peer-to-peer support in the substance use disorder community and others, is critically important in the brain injury community, because you want to know that what you're experiencing is not unique necessarily to you, that other people have experienced this type of loneliness and confusion and vision problems and cognitive issues and short-term memory problems and what have you. And support groups are a wonderful way to do that. And for instance, we have Brain Injury Connections Northwest in Portland, which was before COVID a local Tri-County, Multnomah, Washington, Clackamas County support group. Now they have people joining their virtual support groups from around the state and even around the country, and quite frankly, even from internationally from other countries. So one thing that this video technology has allowed us, and kind of our acceptance of it has allowed us to do, it's to open up those communication abilities and kind of that group interaction, albeit in a two-dimensional world.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I really appreciate the conversation, and just kind of like wrapping up here, I just kind of like to know any final thoughts. Where can people go to sign the letter of support? When is this absolutely going to get vetoed or accepted? Where can people go to find out more information about the bill and what details it covers? Just kind of like a summary, your overall opinions, thoughts on what you hope the bill becomes. Where can people go to support it, send a letter of support, and find out more information?
Yeah, the first thing is I would urge all of your listeners to literally write it down so you have it in front of you, or make a note of it somehow so you don't forget it. Oregon Senate Bill, or SB 420, and that's 2023.
And I'll make sure to have it in the post description once I post this online. It'll be down in the description.
And then what we will do is we will make sure, Amador, that you guys get a copy of our support letter. We have a really nice support letter that allows your listeners to sign support if they are part of an organization, to sign up as a supporting organization. Organizations really, really help. We have, for instance, the endorsement of EOSIL. We have the endorsement of the League of Women Voters. We have the endorsement of the Oregon Nurses Association, Brain Rehab Network, many other Brain Injury Connections Northwest, many other organizations. So we'll provide you with a link on your website that they can access that support letter and sign on either as an individual or as an organization. And then the second and probably even most important thing that they could do would be to contact their legislators, their representative, state representative and state senator. And just a quick email, a quick phone call, it doesn't have to be anything, detailed, just to say, hey, I understand that Senate Bill 420 is out there, that it's coming, it's being considered right now, and I really want you to support this bill. For your listeners in Eastern Oregon, it's important to know that Senator Tim Knopp out of the Redmond area has been a huge supporter of brain injury, of Oregon's brain injury survivors from way, way back. He was active with Max's Law. He was one of the chief sponsors for what's now known as Jenna's Law, which expanded the return to play protocols for all young athletes. This is, in fact, this couldn't be a more bipartisan issue. There is no Republican or Democrat distinguishing with brain injury. Brain injury doesn't discriminate. It happens to anyone, anywhere. And when a person has a brain injury, they likely will need the same types of access to support and services that this bill will allow, regardless of where they live, regardless of who they are, regardless of their political affiliation. That being said, there is going to be a fiscal impact. It is going to cost money, because everything does. Our impact is much, it's not significant in my mind in a $34 billion budget. It's going to be about $800,000, $900,000 to the state per year to fund this. It's going to have 9 navigators and then 3 kind of management support positions above that. So it's really going to be a robust plan, very efficient. We have tons of data that shows that brain injury resource navigation actually saves the state money in the long run by diverting people out of Medicaid, getting people back to work quicker. We haven't touched on justice involved individuals. There is a recent study from 2022 that showed that recidivism rates, meaning the rate that people end up back in jail or prison, is drastically reduced at the 6-month mark when those justice-involved individuals are given brain injury resource navigation after their release. We haven't touched on the fact that 70% plus or minus of all female inmates have a history of brain injury. 55% of homeless individuals have a history of brain injury, most of that brain injury predating their homelessness, and they are extremely susceptible to brain injury when they are on the streets through assault, substance use disorder, whatever the mechanism might be. So, this is an injury that touches, probably everyone in the state by no more than 2 degrees of separation, probably just 1 if you think about it. And it's really important that the public supports it. Politicians, the myth is the politicians are the big leaders, that they kind of do everything for themselves and kind of tell us where to go as constituents. The reality is that it's the constituents that drive the data, drive the agenda, that drive the data. And I know that people out there listening to this podcast understand how important these navigation services will be for people with brain injury. And as a result, it's incredibly important that the constituents, the people of Oregon, rise up and tell their legislators, our leaders, that we need this program.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, David Kracke, for joining me and having the discussion. And and there's a couple things that I didn't get a chance to go over, but also don't want to take up a lot of your time, and you have other obligations afterwards. But I would most definitely like to have you on again to kind of go into the finer details of this bill, kind of go into those stats that you were giving at the end. But overall, thank you so much for your time and sharing your knowledge on this matter. I really do appreciate it. And for everyone listening, thank you so much. This has been the EOCIL podcast. And if you have any questions about today's episode or would like to know more about all of the services and programs that EOCIL has to offer, I encourage everyone to visit us on eocil.org or drop in at one of our 5 office locations in Pendleton, The Dalles, Burns, Ontario, or La Grande. Thank you.